I gave him my kidney to save his life. And once he recovered, he left me for another woman. I risked everything only to be betrayed. You won't believe what happened in my upcoming life. It started like all great love stories, quietly and without warning. I met him on a rainy afternoon in the corner booth of a cafe I almost didn't walk into. He looked up from his book, and I from my coffee, and something passed between us. Not fireworks, not instant passion, just warmth, a pull, a familiarity I couldn't explain. Over the weeks that followed, that pull turned into conversations that lingered long after the coffee cooled, into laughter that made my cheeks hurt, into a bond that felt unshakable. We weren't dramatic or flashy, but we were present, solid, or so I thought. In time, we moved in together. Our mornings became rituals. He'd make the coffee. I'd pack his lunch. We'd argue about silly things, laugh about serious ones, and fall asleep with our feet tangled under the blanket. He made me feel seen, safe, like I could let my guard down for once and still be loved. I wasn't the kind of person who rushed into love, but with him, everything just felt right. He used to call me his anchor, his calm in the storm. I wore those words like armor. I believed them. I believed him. Looking back now, I realize how easy it is to remember only the warmth at the beginning of something, how the soft edges blur out the warning signs, the moments he didn't show up, the times he forgot my birthday, brushed off my worries, turned silence into answers. But back then, I didn't notice, or maybe I didn't want to. After all, when someone gives you love, you don't count the cracks. You hold tighter, thinking your grip alone can keep everything from falling apart. I held on with both hands, completely unaware that soon, I'd be asked to give more than just my heart. I'd be asked to give a part of my body, and I would say yes without hesitation. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. We were in the kitchen, halfway through dinner, when he winced and pressed a hand to his side. I asked if he was okay, and he brushed it off like he always did. Said it was just a muscle cramp, nothing serious. But later that night, I found him curled up on the bathroom floor, pale and sweating, refusing to let me call an ambulance. I didn't listen. By morning, we were sitting in an emergency room under the cold hum of fluorescent lights, waiting for answers I wasn't ready to hear. The doctors ran tests, more than I could count, and hours turned into a blur of scans, blood draws, and quiet dread. When they finally spoke, their voices were calm, but their words hit like a hammer. His kidneys were failing. Fast. They explained the severity, the treatment options, and the transplant wait list that stretched longer than anyone deserved to wait. I sat there numb, listening to a medical reality I couldn't fully grasp. He didn't cry. He just stared ahead like he was already fading. Like a part of him had accepted this ending. But I hadn't. Not for 1 second. I held his hand and promised him we'd figure this out. Together. In the days that followed, I dove headfirst into learning everything I could. I asked questions, made calls, scheduled appointments. When the doctor mentioned the possibility of a live donor, my mind didn't hesitate. I looked at him, tired, scared, trying to stay brave, and I knew, if I was a match, I'd do it. No conditions, no second thoughts. He didn't ask me to. I offered. People say love is sacrifice. I believed that. I wanted to believe that. And this felt like the ultimate act of love. I didn't realize at the time that sometimes love isn't enough. That sometimes, sacrifice becomes currency in a relationship that's already begun to crumble. But I wasn't ready to see that yet. All I saw was the man I loved, and all I wanted was to save him. The decision didn't come with drama. There was no grand moment, no inner turmoil. It was quiet, certain, like instinct. I sat in the car outside the hospital with my hands still trembling from the paperwork I'd just signed, and I felt this strange calm settle over me. It was as if my heart had already decided long before my brain caught up. I loved him. That was enough. I didn't need a parade or applause. I didn't even need gratitude. I just needed him to live. That was all I cared about. When I told him I'd started the process to get tested, he didn't say much. He just looked at me, his eyes soft but unreadable, and said, "You don't have to do this." And I smiled back and replied, "I know. That's why I want to." The next few weeks were filled with tests, physical, psychological, everything in between. I went to appointments alone, juggling my job and the constant pressure of evaluations and deadlines. He was supportive in words, but not always in presence. He missed more than a few doctor visits and forgot one of my test dates entirely. At first, I didn't let it bother me. I told myself he was overwhelmed. I made excuses on his behalf, the way people do when they love someone more than they should. Every time he pulled away emotionally, I just held on tighter, convincing myself it was temporary. One night, after a long day of testing, I came home exhausted and found him on the couch, laughing at something on his phone. I dropped my bag a little louder than necessary. He looked up, smiled faintly, and went back to scrolling. I sat beside him, silently, aching in places I didn't have words for. I wanted him to reach for me, to ask how I was feeling, to say anything that made me believe he understood the weight I was carrying. But instead, he said nothing. And I said nothing back. It was the first time I realized that love can sometimes feel one-sided even when it's standing right next to you. But I wasn't ready to name that truth. Not yet. Preparing for surgery was more than just medical clearances and signed forms, it was a mental and emotional marathon. Every appointment stripped away another layer of illusion, revealing just how alone I was in the process. The doctors were kind, the nurses efficient, but the emotional burden was mine to carry. I started adjusting my diet, increasing water intake, avoiding alcohol, doing everything I could to prepare my body for the operation. He, on the other hand, was growing more distant. He stopped asking about the results, barely reacted when I shared updates. I told myself he was scared. I told myself we both were. But I was showing up. I was the one changing my life, preparing for something irreversible. And he was drifting. We had one meeting scheduled with a transplant counselor, a session both the donor and recipient were supposed to attend. I cleared my work schedule for it. He forgot. When I called to remind him, he said he had a last-minute work thing, promised to make it up to me, and hung up before I could respond. I sat through the meeting alone, nodding politely as the counselor discussed risks, long-term effects, and emotional readiness. She asked if I was sure, if I felt supported. I smiled and said yes. I lied, because admitting the truth meant facing something I wasn't ready to confront, that I was giving everything, and he was giving nothing in return. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was making a mistake. But then I thought of his face the day he got the diagnosis, the quiet fear in his eyes, the way he gripped my hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. I remembered the early days, the laughter, the softness, the love that felt so real. I told myself that version of him was still there, just buried under stress and fear. I held on to that memory like a lifeline, because once you commit to a sacrifice that big, doubt feels like betrayal. And I refused to be the one who gave up. The morning of the surgery was eerily calm. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and anxiety, and everything around me moved in slow motion. Nurses clipped sensors to my chest, whispered instructions, and smiled with the kind of practiced sympathy you only find in surgical wards. He stood beside the bed, quiet and pale, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his hoodie. I looked at him, trying to memorize his face, every line, every shadow, every piece of the man I was doing this for. He leaned down, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "You're amazing." I smiled, trying not to cry. I wanted to believe those words would be enough to carry me through. They wheeled me into the operating room under fluorescent lights that felt too bright, too harsh. I remember the cold of the metal table and the tightness of the oxygen mask. The anesthesiologist asked me to count backward, and I remember getting to 7 before everything disappeared. When I opened my eyes again, it was to pain, sharp, deep, unfamiliar. A nurse's voice filtered in, calling my name, reminding me to breathe. I blinked through the haze, my body heavy, throat dry, and mind scrambling to understand where I was. It hit me slowly. I had done it. I had given up a part of myself for someone I loved. When they allowed him in to see me, he looked tired, like he hadn't slept, but his smile was subdued, almost forced. He said I was brave. He said thank you. But something about his eyes felt distant, detached. I told myself it was the stress, the fear, the exhaustion. I told myself not to read too much into it. After all, this was a monumental moment for both of us. Our lives had just changed forever. We were supposed to be closer than ever. But even in that sterile hospital room, with machines beeping and my body stitched together, something between us already felt broken, and I didn't know how to fix it. Recovery was a slow, aching process. Every movement felt like a battle. Sitting up, walking a few steps, even laughing came with pain. The doctors said I was healing well, but no one really talks about the emotional toll of giving something so vital away. I was tired all the time, drained in ways that sleep couldn't fix, but I kept pushing through, because I believed it was worth it. I believed that love justified the pain. He visited, brought me flowers once, stayed for a few hours here and there, but his presence felt more like a routine than a comfort. He was polite, even caring, but distant. He'd check his phone often, take calls in the hallway, and leave earlier than he used to. Back at home, things didn't return to normal. They shifted into something unfamiliar. He was grateful, sure, but not present. Conversations became brief. Affection became rare. He had moments where he'd hug me and say he was overwhelmed by everything. And I'd cling to those moments like proof that the man I loved was still there. I wanted him to hold me longer. I wanted him to say he saw me, really saw me. But most of the time, I was met with silence or vague reassurances that he was just tired. I convinced myself it was a phase, that we both needed time, that this would pass, and we'd get back to who we were. But the silence grew louder. I'd catch him lost in thought, smiling at texts I couldn't see. He stopped joining me for dinner, started coming home later. When I asked if he was okay, he'd say he was fine but never look me in the eye. I felt like a stranger in my own home, like a placeholder in someone else's life. I had given him a part of my body, but I could feel him pulling away from everything else. I was healing physically, yes, but emotionally, I was unraveling. And I didn't know how to ask him to stay when he'd already started leaving in pieces. It didn't happen all at once. It was subtle, like watching a tide pull back grain by grain. He stopped saying goodnight, stopped checking in. He spent more time outside the house, work, gym, just needed some air. I stopped asking questions because the answers felt rehearsed, hollow. I told myself not to be paranoid, but my gut was louder than my denial. I started noticing things. His phone always face down. Sudden bursts of energy when texting, passwords changed without mention. I wasn't looking for proof of anything, but it felt like the proof was looking for me. I was no longer part of his routine. I was an obligation. And love shouldn't feel like a favor. One night, I made his favorite dinner. I lit candles. I waited. He didn't come home. No call. No message. I stared at the food until it went cold, until I couldn't pretend it didn't hurt. When he finally walked in, hours later, I asked him where he'd been. He muttered something about meeting an old friend, eyes darting away. I nodded. I didn't push. I didn't cry. I just sat there, numb, knowing in my bones that whatever we had was slipping away, and he wasn't even trying to hold on. The man I gave my kidney to now looked at me like I was a stranger. And for the first time, I began to wonder if maybe I was the only one who ever truly loved us. Then, late one night, I saw it. His phone lit up with a message while he was asleep beside me. I didn't mean to look, but I did. Can't wait to see you again, babe. My chest caved in. The room spun. I got up, walked to the bathroom, and sat on the floor in silence. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but my face was dry. No tears, just the crushing weight of betrayal. I had given him life, and he had given someone else his heart. If this story has moved you so far, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful true stories. Your support helps us share voices that deserve to be heard. Morning came, but I didn't feel the sun. I moved through the house like a shadow, quiet and invisible. I didn't confront him right away. I needed to gather myself, to believe what I had seen before letting it break me. But the silence between us had turned heavy, like a wall neither of us was willing to climb. I waited until we were both home, the air thick with words unsaid. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling his phone. When I asked him softly, "Are you seeing someone else?" He didn't flinch, didn't deny it, just looked up with tired eyes and said, "I didn't mean for it to happen." That was all it took. The truth didn't explode. It settled in like dust after an earthquake. Quiet, devastating. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I sat across from him and asked the questions I wasn't ready to hear the answers to. How long? Since right after the surgery. Did she know about me? Yes. Did she know about the kidney? He nodded. My chest ached in places no scalpel had touched. I asked him why. Why, after everything, would he do this? He shrugged and said something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. I didn't ask you to do it. You chose to. It was meant to be a justification, but it sounded like a verdict, as if my love had been a burden he never wanted to carry. In that moment, something inside me broke, but not in the way he expected. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the scar on my side. A reminder of the choice I made. A reminder of the love I gave freely. He may not have asked me to save him, but I did. I did because I loved him. And maybe he didn't deserve it, but I did. I deserved to love that deeply, even if he didn't know how to love me back. The days that followed blurred into one another. Time stopped meaning anything. I went through the motions, woke up, dressed, worked, but nothing felt real. He moved out 2 days after our conversation, taking only what he needed, leaving behind the silence and the shadow of what we used to be. He didn't fight. He didn't apologize. He didn't even cry. Watching him walk out the door with that final suitcase felt like watching the credits roll on a movie I didn't know was ending. I stood at the window as his car disappeared, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself fall apart. The house was too quiet. Every corner held a memory. Every object a reminder. The toothbrush he forgot. The coffee mug he never liked but used anyway. The half-folded laundry he left behind. Grief doesn't come just for the loss of a person. It comes for the loss of a future, of shared routines, of invisible dreams that never got to be real. Friends reached out, offered kind words, comfort, and distraction. But none of it filled the void. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was gutted. I had given someone my trust, my devotion, my body, and they left without a backward glance. In the mirror, I could still see the scar. It ached in the cold, throbbed when I cried, pulsed when I tried to sleep. It wasn't just a mark on my skin, it was a wound on my soul. I wondered if I had been foolish, naive, or simply too loving. I asked myself that question 100 times. But the truth is, I didn't regret the kidney. I regretted giving it to someone who couldn't carry the weight of what it meant. I thought love was enough. But love, when it isn't returned, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a lesson you never asked for. One carved into your body forever. It's strange how pain can become familiar. How something that once felt unbearable eventually becomes a part of your rhythm. In the weeks after he left, I found myself floating between numbness and clarity. Some mornings, I woke up and forgot for a split second that he was gone. Other times, I woke up with tears already in my eyes. I started talking to myself more, out loud, as if the silence needed to be filled with something. I questioned everything. My judgment, my worth, my choices. I replayed the story from the beginning, searching for clues, for signs I might have missed. But the truth is, I saw the signs. I just chose to love him anyway. There's a particular kind of ache that comes from realizing someone you trusted never truly valued you. It's not loud or violent. It's quiet, persistent, a slow unraveling of hope. I thought about the surgery often, not out of regret, but out of disbelief. I had changed my body for him. I had altered my future. And he walked away like it meant nothing. But slowly, I started to see things differently. The more I reflected, the more I realized I hadn't done it for him alone. I had done it because of the kind of person I am. Because when I love fully. Because I believed in standing by the people I care about. That wasn't weakness. That was strength. There's power in survival. In facing something devastating and still choosing to wake up, eat, breathe, function. I started reclaiming pieces of myself, not all at once, but quietly. I picked up hobbies I had forgotten. I cleaned out the spaces he once filled. I stopped answering questions I didn't know anyone answers to. Most importantly, I began to forgive myself, not for loving him, but for holding myself responsible for his choices. Because I had done something extraordinary. I had given life, not just to him, but back to myself. And that kind of strength doesn't disappear. It rebuilds, one breath at a time. I didn't expect to see him again, not after how cleanly he had left. But life has its way of circling back to unfinished stories. It was a random afternoon, weeks after the silence had settled, when I saw his name flash on my phone. A message. Just 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to reply. A part of me wanted answers, closure, maybe even a trace of remorse. Another part feared reopening a wound that had just started to scab. But in the end, I said yes. Not for him, but for myself. Because I needed to know if the person who walked away so easily had ever truly understood what I had given him. We met at a quiet park where no one would notice the tension between us. He looked the same, but different, calmer, maybe even a little ashamed. He started talking before I even sat down, words tumbling out about how confused he'd been, how everything happened so fast, how he didn't handle it well. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he was done, he looked at me, waiting, for forgiveness, for softness, for something I no longer owed. I asked him the one question that mattered. Did you love me, or just the convenience of being loved? He didn't answer, and that silence said more than anything else ever could. I stood up to leave, and he reached for my hand, but I didn't let him touch me. I looked him in the eyes, steady and sure, and said, "You took a part of me, and you threw it away like it was nothing. But that part, my kidney, didn't make me weaker. It reminded me of how strong I am. You may have walked away, but I stayed. I stayed with myself. I walked away that day not just from him, but from everything I had allowed to hold me hostage, doubt, pain, blame. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need validation. I had faced the storm and walked out stronger than I'd ever been. Closure doesn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It comes quietly, sometimes when you least expect it. A few days after the confrontation, I found myself sitting alone in our old bedroom, the one that used to echo with laughter, late-night conversations, and dreams whispered into the dark. The wall still carried his shadow, but I didn't feel haunted anymore. I opened the drawer beside the bed and found a small box he'd once given me. A bracelet with a simple engraving, "Forever, no matter what." I held it in my hand for a moment, then placed it gently into a donation bag. There was no anger, no pain, just peace. I began letting go in small, deliberate steps. I deleted our old photos from my phone, not out of spite, but because I no longer needed them to prove the love had been real. I threw away the last bottle of his cologne. I stopped looking over my shoulder in public spaces, wondering if I'd run into him. He had become a chapter I had finished reading, a story I no longer needed to revisit. Closure wasn't about erasing the past. It was about freeing myself from its grip. And in doing so, I realized something I hadn't seen before. I had never been the broken one. I had been the one who stayed whole while giving everything. There was a moment that sealed it for me. A moment so ordinary, it almost slipped by unnoticed. I laughed at something on TV, loud and full, and suddenly realized I hadn't thought of him in hours. That laugh didn't carry the weight of loss. It was just joy. Simple, unfiltered joy. And that was when I knew. I had closed the door, not because someone told me to, not because I forced myself to, but because I had finally outgrown the space where he used to live. Closure wasn't a decision. It was a becoming, and I had become someone who no longer needed the past to justify her pain. It started with small things. I rearranged the furniture. I bought new bed sheets, yellow ones, bright and unapologetic. I went out for breakfast alone, sat by the window, and actually enjoyed the silence. For the first time in a long while, I began making choices without considering how he would react. I wore the earrings he never liked. I played music he used to mock. I stopped editing myself. Little by little, I reclaimed my space, my time, my voice, and with every quiet act of defiance against the ghost of who I used to be, I became more myself than I had ever been with him. One morning, I signed up for a volunteer program that helped coordinate transplant support groups. I wasn't sure why at first, maybe to feel useful, maybe to give my experience meaning. But it became something much bigger. Listening to others share their stories, their fears, their regrets, reminded me that I wasn't alone, that my scar wasn't a symbol of betrayal, it was a badge of survival. I told my story not to seek sympathy but to remind others that love, even when it breaks us, doesn't define us. We do. And that realization became the cornerstone of my new beginning. I still had hard days. Healing isn't linear. There were nights I stared at the ceiling and replayed everything. But I didn't drown in those memories anymore. I let them pass through me like waves, and then I let them go. I was no longer the woman who gave everything to someone who gave nothing back. I was someone who gave with a full heart, survived the aftermath, and chose to live, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. And somewhere in all that pain and loss, I found something priceless. Freedom. Freedom to start over. Freedom to choose myself. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that love, real love, is never measured by how much you give, but by how equally you're held in return. I gave a part of my body to someone I believed would be there for life. I gave it not to win his affection, not to prove my worth, but because I loved without condition. And that love, even when met with betrayal, wasn't wasted. Because love that comes from truth, from kindness, from sincerity, that love always matters, even if the person receiving it doesn't recognize its value. There are people in this world who will take what you offer and still tell you it wasn't enough. Who will let you break yourself open for them and walk away without looking back. That's not your failure. That's not a flaw in your heart. That's a flaw in theirs. And the lesson isn't to stop giving. It's to give wisely. To love yourself just as fiercely as you love others. To set boundaries that protect your peace, not walls that block out possibility. Because strength isn't in holding on to people who hurt you. It's in letting go without letting them change who you are. If someone out there is listening, wondering if they were wrong to give too much, I hope you hear this. You weren't. You loved. You hoped. You believed. And maybe that love didn't save them, but it saved you. It proved you have a heart that still dares to care, that still dares to try. Don't silence that part of you. Honor it, protect it, and never, ever let anyone convince you that your love was a mistake. Because people can leave, but the love you gave, when it was honest, stays with you, and it becomes your strength. Time moved on, and so did I, not in a dramatic, movie-ending kind of way, but in quiet, steady steps. The kind you don't even notice at first. I stopped counting how many days it had been since he left. I stopped comparing who I was with who I had been. Life became less about what I'd lost and more about what I'd built in its place. I found new rhythms, new routines. I started waking up with clarity instead of heaviness. I looked in the mirror and saw a version of myself I hadn't met before. One that was softer in some ways, stronger in others, but most importantly, whole. The scar remained, of course. Faint but present. A reminder of the pain, the sacrifice, and the resilience that followed. I didn't hide it. I didn't feel the need to. It had become part of my story, not the part that defined me, but the one that shaped me. People still ask if I regret it, if I wish I'd made a different choice, and I always answer the same. I don't regret giving. I regret trusting someone who didn't value the gift. But the giving, that was never the mistake. Because love, real, honest love, doesn't leave you empty. It teaches you. It grows you. And in the end, it frees you. So here I am now. Not broken, not bitter, but beautifully unfinished. With new pages ahead and the pen in my own hands. I no longer wait for apologies that never came. I no longer carry the weight of someone else's absence. I live, fully and fiercely, with the kind of heart that doesn't shrink in the face of hurt but expands. And if you've ever given more than you received, I hope you know this. You're not weak. You're not foolish. You're brave. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is keep your heart open, even after someone walks away with a piece of it. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true life journeys that matter. Your support helps us bring powerful stories to light, one voice at a time.